Picture this. You are standing in the dusty main street of a town called Redemption Gulch, a name so thick with irony it could choke you. The sun beats down, a hammer on an anvil, and every window is a judging eye. You are Alara, the town midwife, and your hands, which have brought dozens of new lives into this unforgiving world, are trembling. But it's not from fear. It's from a rage so pure and so cold it threatens to freeze the very marrow in your bones. Before you stands Mayor Thorne, a man whose grief has curdled into a vile and public poison. His wife died a year ago, not under your care, but he has chosen you as the vessel for his bitterness. He points a condemning finger, his voice a gravelly proclamation meant for every listening ear. "Look at her," he bellows, his words rolling like thunder through the stifling air. "She calls herself a midwife. She presumes to understand the sacred mystery of birth. Yet her own womb is a barren desert, a curse. Her touch is a blight on the sanctity of motherhood." The crowd murmurs, a low, dangerous hum. They are good people, mostly, but they are swayed by power and fear, and Mayor Thorne holds both in his clenched fists. They look at you, their faces a mixture of pity and suspicion. The whispers have been circling for months, like vultures over a dying animal. She has no children of her own. It isn't natural. The shame they try to force upon you is a heavy cloak, but you refuse to wear it. You lift your chin, your gaze meeting the mayor's without flinching. Inside, your heart is a shattered piece of porcelain, but you will not give him the satisfaction of seeing the cracks. The moment breaks when a boy comes running, his face pale with panic. "It's my ma. The baby's coming, but it's sideways." He looks at you, his eyes pleading. You don't hesitate. You push through the crowd, ignoring the mayor's sputtering rage, and follow the boy to a small, desperate cabin on the edge of town. The father stands at the door, blocking your way, his face a mask of conflict. Thorne said, "He said you were bad luck," from inside. A woman's scream rips through the air, a sound of pure agony. It's a sound you know better than your own name. You look the man dead in the eye. Your wife is dying. Your child is dying. The only luck in this room right now is the luck you make. Now step aside. Your voice is not loud, but it carries the weight of every life you have ever saved. He crumbles, his resolve washed away by the tide of his wife's pain. For the next 3 hours, you work in a crucible of sweat and prayer. You are not a holy woman, but this work is your religion. You use every ounce of your knowledge, your hands steady and sure as you gently, painstakingly turn the baby. Finally, with the dawn painting the sky in hues of rose and gold, a new cry joins the chorus of the world. A healthy baby girl. The mother weeps with relief, clutching her child to her chest. You clean your instruments, your body aching with exhaustion but your spirit alight. As you step out of the cabin, the father is waiting. You expect gratitude, a nod, perhaps. Instead, he looks at the ground and spits in the dust near your feet. "We'll be paying the mayor's fine for using you," he mutters, and refuses to meet your eyes. That is the moment the last thread holding you to Redemption Gulch snaps. That night, under the cold, indifferent gaze of a sliver moon, you pack a small bag. Your books, your herbs, the worn leather pouch of your instruments. You leave a small bundle of lavender on the grave of your mother, the woman who taught you everything. You saddle your mare, Wispy, and ride out of town without a backward glance. You are heading into the Badlands, a place where nature is cruel but honest. This cruelty is a clean thing, not like the twisted, whispering malice of men. 3 days into your journey, the sky turns the color of a fresh bruise. A storm, sudden and violent, descends upon the plains. The wind howls like a grieving banshee, and rain falls in blinding sheets. Wispy, spooked by a crack of lightning, stumbles, her leg twisting with a sickening crack of bone. You are thrown, your head hitting a rock. The world dissolves into a swirling vortex of pain and darkness. When you awake, the storm has passed, but the world is a cold, damp, and hostile place. Your horse is lame. You are miles from anywhere, your supplies are soaked, and a throbbing ache radiates from your temple. You are alone, truly and utterly alone. Despair, a cold and patient predator, begins to circle. You stumble onward, driven by some primal instinct you didn't know you possessed. You walk for what feels like an eternity, the landscape a blur of rock and sagebrush. Just as your legs give out, just as you are ready to surrender to the vast, empty wilderness, you see it. Tucked away in a small, sheltered canyon, almost invisible against the rock face, is a cabin. A thin curl of smoke rises from its chimney. It's a sign of life, a flicker of hope in a world that had gone dark. With the last of your strength, you crawl towards it, collapsing in the mud before the weathered fence gate, the world finally fading to black. He found her there, a broken doll cast upon his doorstep by the tempest. Silas had lived in self-imposed exile for 10 years, and the last thing he wanted was a complication from the world he had forsaken. He knelt, his movements stiff, and saw the deep gash on her temple, the exhaustion etched into every line of her face. He saw the midwife's bag clutched in her hand, its contents spilled slightly in the mud. He recognized the herbs. He recognized the look of a soul hunted by something worse than the elements. With a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of a decade of solitude, he carefully lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, as if the world had already taken its pound of flesh and then some. He carried her inside his small, sturdy cabin. The interior was Spartan but immaculately clean. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting a warm, dancing light on the hand-carved furniture and the single, faded photograph on the mantelpiece. A smiling woman holding a baby. Alara drifted in and out of consciousness for 2 days. She was aware of gentle hands cleaning her wound, of a cool cloth on her fevered brow, of the savory taste of broth being spooned between her lips. She was aware of a presence, a large, quiet shape moving in the periphery. When she finally opened her eyes with clarity, she saw him sitting in a chair by the fire, sharpening a knife with methodical strokes. He was a man carved from the same hard landscape that surrounded them. His face was a roadmap of a difficult life, dominated by a thin, white scar that ran from the corner of his left eye to the edge of his mouth, giving him a permanent look of grim contemplation. His eyes, the color of a stormy sky, held a sorrow so deep it seemed bottomless. He looked up, sensing her gaze. "You're awake," he said. His voice was rough, like stones grinding together, as if it hadn't been used for conversation in a long time. "Where am I?" she whispered, her own voice a fragile thing. "My ranch," he answered, not offering a name. "Your horse is in the barn. Her leg is splinted. She'll heal," he said nothing more, turning his attention back to the knife. His silence was not menacing. It was a wall, thick and high, built to keep the world out. And for the moment, Alara was grateful to be on the inside of it. The days that followed unfolded in a quiet, rhythmic pattern. Silas was a man of routine. He rose before the sun, tended to his few cattle and his horse, worked the small patch of land where he grew vegetables, and spent his evenings in quiet contemplation by the fire. He spoke little, but his actions spoke volumes. He left food for her, refilled her water pitcher, and never once asked who she was or what she was running from. He seemed to understand that some wounds needed silence to heal. As her strength returned, Alara began to emerge from the cocoon of her convalescence. She couldn't bear to be idle. She started by tidying the cabin, her movements slow and deliberate. Then she ventured into his garden, her midwife's knowledge of plants translating easily to cultivation. She found wild mint and yarrow growing near the creek that ran through the canyon and made a soothing tea, leaving a steaming mug for him on the table in the evenings. She saw how he favored his right shoulder and mixed a balm of comfrey and juniper to ease the ache. She mended the rip in his shirt with small, neat stitches. They were small offerings, silent words in a language of mutual respect for each other's solitude. She was repaying a debt, but it was becoming something more. She was tending to his world, and in doing so, she was tending to herself. One afternoon, while checking on Wispy in the barn, she found a small, meticulously carved wooden horse, its lines smooth and perfect. It was tucked away in an old crate, wrapped in a small, moth-eaten baby blanket. The grief it represented was so palpable it felt like a physical presence in the small space. She gently rewrapped the toy and put it back, her heart aching for the silent man in the cabin and the story he so clearly could not tell. Their slow, careful dance around one another continued for weeks. They were two solitary planets who had fallen into a shared, stable orbit. They ate their meals together in comfortable silence, the crackle of the fire their only conversation. Yet, in that silence something was growing. A fragile trust. A sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. She no longer felt like the shamed midwife of Redemption Gulch. Here, in this hidden canyon, she was just Elara. And he was just Silas. One evening, a chill wind rattled the windows, a mournful sound that seemed to pull the darkness closer. Elara was staring into the flames, her thoughts drifting back to the faces of the townspeople, to the sting of the father's spit in the dust. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. She didn't realize she was crying until Silas spoke, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "A ghost from your past?" he asked, his gaze fixed on the fire. She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She found herself telling him everything. The whispers, the shaming, Mayor Thorne's cruelty. She spoke of the bitter irony of dedicating her life to bringing children into the world while being condemned for having none of her own. "They called me barren," she whispered, the word tasting like ash in her mouth, like I was a patch of useless ground. "They couldn't understand that my heart could be full. Even if my womb was empty." Silas remained silent for a long time, the only sound the hiss and pop of the burning logs. Elara thought perhaps she had said too much, had breached the unspoken contract of their quiet coexistence. But then he turned his head, and for the first time, he looked directly at her, his storm-gray eyes holding hers. The wall around him seemed to develop a crack. He gestured to the faded photograph on the mantel. "My wife, Sarah, and our son, Daniel." His voice was thick with unshed tears. "We lost them both to a winter fever 8 years ago. I was the one who was supposed to protect them. I was the one who brought the doctor from town too late." The confession hung in the air between them, heavy and raw. He had just handed her the broken pieces of his own heart. He looked away, back at the fire, his jaw tight, and then he whispered the words that would change everything. The words that would rebuild her world. "A healer's hands are a gift from God, Elara. They don't need to have held their own to know the value of a life. What you do, it is a sacred trust. Don't let men with hollow souls convince you otherwise." The haunted rancher had whispered a truth so profound it silenced all the ugly lies she had been told. In that moment, sitting in a hidden cabin with a man as broken as she was, Elara felt a profound sense of peace. The shame she had carried for so long finally began to lift, its weight replaced by the quiet strength of his understanding. They were no longer two strangers. They were survivors, and their shared sanctuary had just become a home. The fragile peace of their canyon was not meant to last. The outside world, with its long memory and even longer reach, was about to come crashing in. A lone rider, a trapper from a settlement north of Redemption Gulch, passed through the lower edge of Silas's property while checking his lines. He was a gossip, a man who traded in news as much as he did in pelts. He saw a woman in the garden, her face familiar from his infrequent trips to town. The midwife, the one Mayor Thorne had practically run out on a rail. When he next passed through Redemption Gulch, he traded this juicy bit of information for a free drink at the saloon. The news reached Mayor Thorne's ears within the hour. Thorne was a man whose power was built on a foundation of absolute control. Elara's defiance by surviving, and, by the trapper's account, thriving, was an intolerable insult. It suggested his judgment was not final, that his power had limits. Furthermore, she had found refuge with Silas Blackwood, a man who had his own history of defying the town's unspoken rules. Years ago, Silas had refused to sell a portion of his land to Thorne for a mining venture, earning the mayor's permanent ire. Finding them together was, in Thorne's twisted mind, a conspiracy against his authority. He would not stand for it. He needed to bring her back, not just to punish her, but to make an example of her. He needed to show everyone in Redemption Gulch that no one escaped his grasp. He couldn't simply ride out and grab her. He needed the pretense of law, so he manufactured it. He went to the town's timid judge, a man deep in Thorn's pocket, and spun a tale of theft and witchcraft. He claimed Alara had stolen rare medicinal herbs from the late doctor's office, herbs that were now town property, and that she was practicing dark arts outside the purview of civilized society. With a freshly signed, fraudulent warrant in his hand, Thorn deputized 3 of his most thuggish cronies. They were cruel, simple men who enjoyed the power a tin star afforded them. As they prepared to ride out, a sense of grim satisfaction settled over the mayor. He would not only reclaim his authority but would also have the pleasure of breaking the spirit of the man who had denied him once before. Back at the ranch, a subtle shift had occurred between Alara and Silas. The whispered confession had opened a door between them, and through it passed a quiet current of companionship. They talked more now, sharing stories of their pasts, their small joys and deep sorrows. Alara learned about the wife Silas had adored and the son who had his mother's bright laugh. Silas learned about the unyielding passion that drove Alara to her calling, a force so powerful it had become the very center of her being. He saw not a barren woman, but a woman whose capacity to nurture was so immense it couldn't be contained by a single family. It had to be shared with a whole community. One afternoon, as Silas was repairing a fence at the edge of the canyon, he saw a dust cloud on the horizon. It was too large for a single rider. His body went rigid. He had not had visitors in 10 years. Visitors were never good news. He dropped his tools and ran back to the cabin. "Alara," he said, his voice taut with an urgency she had never heard before. "Get inside. Stay away from the windows." She saw the look in his eyes, the look of a man preparing for a battle he had long hoped to avoid. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced her newfound peace. She did as he said, her heart hammering against her ribs. Silas pulled his old rifle from its place above the mantel, his movements economical and precise. The solitary, grieving rancher was gone. In his place stood a protector, his stance rooted and unyielding as the ancient rocks of the canyon itself. He stood on the porch, the rifle held loosely at his side, and waited. For riders emerged from the dust, with Mayor Thorn at their head. They reined in their horses just outside the fence, their arrogance a palpable stench on the clean canyon air. Thorn smirked, his eyes sweeping over Silas with open contempt before fixing on the cabin door. "Blackwood," he called out, his voice dripping with false authority. "We're not here for you. We have a warrant for the woman you're harboring. Alara Martin. She's a thief and a danger to the community. Send her out." Silas's face was a stone mask. "She's neither of those things. And she's not going anywhere." "Is that so?" Thorn dismounted, swaggering towards the gate. He held up the warrant. "This piece of paper says otherwise. Signed by the judge." "It's the law." "That's not law," Silas replied, his voice a low growl. "That's your wounded pride written on a piece of paper. You have no jurisdiction on my land, Thorn. And you have no claim on her." Thorn's sneer widened. "Always so high and mighty, aren't you, Blackwood? Hiding out here after you let your own family die. And now you've taken up with a barren midwife. A real collection of failures you've got here." The insult was designed to shatter him, but it had the opposite effect. It solidified his resolve into something as hard as steel. He raised the rifle, the click of the hammer being cocked echoing in the tense silence. "The last man who tried to take something from me is buried on that hill," Silas said, his voice dangerously calm. "I suggest you turn your horses around and ride away before you join him." Inside, Alara listened, her hands pressed against her mouth to stifle a cry. She had brought this trouble to his door. Her past had hunted her down and was now threatening to destroy the one person who had shown her true kindness. She would not let him fight this battle alone. She opened the door and stepped onto the porch, standing beside Silas, her head held high. "I am not a thief, Mayor," she said, her voice clear and steady. "And I am not your property. You shamed me and you drove me out. You have no more power over me." Thorn's face contorted with fury. He had expected her to be cowering. He had expected Silas to be a broken man. This united front was more than an obstacle. It was an act of rebellion. "You'll regret this," he snarled, gesturing to his men. "Both of you." The standoff was a taut wire, ready to snap. The canyon held its breath, waiting for the explosion of violence that seemed inevitable. The mayor's men drew their pistols, their faces grim. The air grew thick, heavy with the promise of bloodshed. Silas stood his ground, a mountain of defiance, Elara a pillar of resolve beside him. He would not let them pass. Not now, not ever. But just as Thorn gave the signal to advance, a new sound cut through the tension, the thunder of approaching hoofbeats, not from the direction of the plains, but from the winding trail that led back towards Redemption Gulch. A group of riders appeared, coming fast. At their head was a man Elara recognized instantly, the father of the baby she had saved on the day she left, the man who had spit in the dust. He was not alone. With him were 3 other families, men and women whose children she had brought into the world, whose fevers she had broken with her herbal remedies in the dead of night. They reined in their horses, forming a line between Thorn's posse and the cabin, a human shield of simple, determined folk. The father, whose name was Thomas, dismounted. He looked not at Elara, but directly at Mayor Thorn, his face etched with a shame far deeper than any Elara had ever felt. "You're wrong about her, Mayor," Thomas said, his voice ringing with newfound conviction. "You told us she was a curse. You filled our heads with poison. But on the day my daughter was born, my wife was dying. The doctor was drunk and useless. This woman," he finally turned, his eyes meeting Elara's, and she saw not hatred, but profound, humbling gratitude. "This woman walked through a wall of our fear and ignorance and saved them both. She is not a curse. She is a blessing." A woman from the group spoke up, her voice trembling but strong. "She saved my boy from the croup, sat with him for 2 nights straight and asked for nothing in return." Another man added, "When the bank was going to take our farm, she gave us her savings, told us to pay her back when we could, one by one." They gave their testimony, each story a stone pulled from the foundation of Thorn's authority. His power was built on their fear, and right now they were not afraid. They were grateful, and they were angry. Thorn was flabbergasted. These were his people, the sheep he had so easily led. To see them turn on him, to defend the very woman he had outcast, was to watch his entire world crumble. His deputized thugs looked at each other, their resolve faltering. It was one thing to strong-arm a lone man and a woman. It was another to point their guns at their own neighbors. "This is not your concern," Thorn sputtered, his face turning a blotchy red. "This is official town business." Thomas took a step forward, his gaze unwavering. "This is our business. She is our business. You can take your piece of paper and your lies, and you can get off this land. Redemption Gulch deserves better than a leader who rules with fear." The mayor looked from the determined faces of the townspeople to the unyielding barrels of Silas's rifle. He was beaten. The warrant in his hand was now just a worthless piece of paper. With a snarl of pure hatred, he ripped it in 2 and threw the pieces to the ground. "You'll all regret this," he hissed, but his threat was hollow, the venom drawn. He mounted his horse and, with his disgraced men trailing behind him, rode away, swallowed by the same dust from which he had emerged. The silence that descended was filled not with tension, but with a profound and cleansing relief. Elara felt tears welling in her eyes, not of sorrow, but of overwhelming joy. Thomas walked towards her, stopping a few feet away. He took off his hat, twisting the brim in his hands. "Ma'am," he said, his voice thick, I am ashamed of how I treated you. I was a fool and a coward. I hope someday you can forgive me." "There is nothing to forgive," Elara said, her voice soft. "You were afraid, and today you were brave. Thank you." That evening, the canyon was filled with a sound it hadn't heard in a decade. Laughter. The families stayed, sharing the food they had brought. A bonfire was lit, its cheerful flames dancing against the twilight sky. They gathered around the fire, sharing stories and making plans. They spoke of starting a new community, away from the mayor's poison, centered around the canyon that had become a sanctuary. Silas, who had spent 10 years in the company of ghosts, found himself surrounded by life. He watched Alara as she held Thomas's baby girl, her face illuminated by the firelight, glowing with a love so pure and powerful it took his breath away. He saw her not as a midwife or a healer or an outcast. He saw her as the heart of this new, unlikely family. And as he looked at the faces around him, faces of people bound not by blood, but by shared courage and mutual respect, he realized he was finally, truly home. The scar on his face was still there, but for the first time in years it didn't ache. What does it truly mean to build a family? Is it a matter of shared blood, of a name carried down through generations? Or is it something deeper, something forged in the fires of adversity and tempered by the steel of loyalty? Alara was called barren, a word meant to wound, to define her by what she lacked. But they were wrong. Her life was not empty. It was abundant. Her love was a force of nature, powerful enough to heal a community, to mend a broken man, and to build a home in the heart of the wilderness. Silas was a man haunted by loss, a recluse who believed his life's purpose had died with his wife and son. Yet, in defending another, he rediscovered his own strength. He learned that protecting others is the surest way to heal yourself. Their story reminds us that our greatest purpose is often found not in what we possess, but in what we give away. It teaches us that the cruelest labels the world puts upon us can be silenced by the quiet truth of our own actions. And it shows us that sometimes, the most beautiful families are the ones we choose, the ones that rise from the ashes of our deepest pain. Have you ever felt judged by a world that didn't understand your heart? Have you ever found strength in an unexpected place, or a family where you least expected it? If this story of redemption and the power of a found family touched your soul, please let us know in the comments below. Your stories give us all hope. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more tales that remind us that even in the harshest of landscapes, love can find a way to bloom.